Hello and welcome to the eve before Christmas Eve, I think. Yes. Anyway, look, what I have on the bench today, or on the carpety bench, is Bob's beautiful Pelham blue Epiphone Les Paul. And I'm not going to say copy because somebody told me off for saying Les Paul copy when I was talking about Epiphones, because they are Les Pauls, they're not copies. So this is the Pelham blue Les Paul Standard from Epiphone. Oh, there's a tiny blemish up here under the clear lacquer, but that's the only imperfection I can find on this entire thing. Beautiful looking thing, as you can see. Metallic Pelham sparkly blue, cream binding, very accurate, nicely done binding. Everything about it is just luscious to look at. In reality, I still wouldn't say that. Construction wise, people often ask which is better, vintage V100s or this, and build wise I can't straight away say there's any major difference. However, vintage don't sorry, they probably do, they make a gold one, and they might make one, is that the mid-yaw one? They might make one in this colour, but I think they might make a semi-acoustic in this 3 something in this colour, but this makes this stand apart. If this was just a standard Les Paul Standard in, I don't know, standard sunbursty thing, it wouldn't be quite so impressive, but this is doubly so because of the beautiful metallic blue. So I hope you're enjoying drooling over that. I do really like it. It's very striking, also very nice condition too. So here we have the Les Paul Standard in Pelham blue, and Bob got a super deal on this, and so with the money he saved on buying this, he's going to get a setup done. And initial observations about this guitar are that it has a little bit, first of all, the action is it's just about 2 down here and 1.6 down here, so there's a bit of room for adjustment there. Even at that action, there's a little bit of zoom as we bend it. I mean, it looks like a 12-inch radius, so you wouldn't be expecting that unless there's some fret unevenness. So it probably is a little bit there. So we'll lower it. We'll probably run into more problems. Down at this end, oh sorry, in terms of relief, there's almost none. Barely 0.1 of a millimetre relief, so I think we need to increase that a little bit. So let's say we'll go for 0.2, give it a little bit more room, and then down at this end we've got about 0.85, 0.9, so this is significantly high, and I'm looking at a plastic nut here which I don't think is going to cut the mustard when it comes to accurate settings, so I think I'm going to change that out for a bone one. Now, just a slight change in colour obviously, from the cream finish to the white, but I think it's, as I said to Bob back in the house just now, I think it's really important that if this thing's going to stay in tune and be intonated properly, then this measurement here has got to be really precise, and I don't think there's any point struggling to do it on plastic just because it's a nice colour. So I'm afraid, and it actually also, it doesn't look. I'm going to try the material. If it works and if it cuts properly, then I'll leave it, but if necessary I'll replace it with bone. There's something about it that makes me think it's an addition, so it doesn't look like tusk, it's too shiny, but I'll see what happens when we come to cut it. If it's good cutting material and I can get the accuracy, we'll leave it. But it does look like it's been added in other words, doesn't meet the lacquer job here. I'm not sure on these whether the lacquer normally goes up over this joint, but on some guitars you'll find that it does on the original nut. Anyhow, so yeah, 0.9, 0.85, 0.9 over here, which is no doubt going to be causing a tiring action at this end, but also I can feel it. I don't know how well you can see, but that's really pressing miles down to get to the fret. So that's going to cause intonation issues, so we can get rid of that. Let's drop the action a little bit. Let's expose excuse me, we'll expose whatever underlying uneven frets may be lurking. So I'm just going to switch specs for a minute, and I'm not quite sure where this camera is pointing on this slightly narrower angle lens, so if I'm a bit off target, apologies. Okay, so I'm just going to wind this in a little bit. I'm going to aim for exactly 1.5 at this bottom string, at this string low E, 1.5, and I'm going to aim for 1.2 on the high E. We're kind of just about out of adjustment room there. I think that's about right, spot on, and both facing upwards, which is quite a nice addition. Now here is where you might find some problems. Not too bad, but a little bit. Yeah, a little bit buzz. Ah, I took my screwdriver inside. For damped, I have to use a different one. Anyway, yes, so Christmas is about to drop on us, and I don't know about you, but I've sort of, my days of being too excited by Christmas have kind of gone. A bit of a humbug now these days. It was kind of different when the kids were smaller. What's going to be nice is having our big kids, well, having some of our big kids come over tonight and stay for a couple of days, and then I get to go and see, I think I'll go and see my two boys up in Wales around, I think, the New Year's Day. I think we're going to hang out and get together and go for a walk and have a meal, so that should be nice. They've just become kind of independent and got their own lives and jobs and exciting things like that. So okay, so to just quickly to slack this truss rod off a little bit, I'm going to go counterclockwise, which is towards the camera. Just do a couple of little turns. So what I'm also going to do, I think these are 10s on this here guitar. I'm just about out of batteries on this little unit. Just want to get I always do this, I go, these are 10s, and then they turn out to be 9s. Okay. 10, 12, 10 and 13. I think they're 10s. That's my feeling. I could be wrong, but I'll go with 10s. Okay, so while I'm at it, and while I've still got my close-up specs on, I'm just going to check the relief and see if it's changed. What I want is, I'm going to aim for about 0.25. I think Gibson's own recommendation I saw on something the other day is, wow, this really is low. I mean, there is some, but my goodness, it hasn't really made an adjustment at all. Yeah, Gibson's own recommendation I think is about 0.3 something, I seem to remember. Let's see what happens. Might have to wait a little bit. That's opening up. Could take a little while, but that is just about exactly 0.25. I'll just try, I'm not going to rush that. I'm going to just try it on a 0.3. 0.3, maybe. Yeah, 0.25 as it stands. It's feeling good. I'll double check the playing action at this end, which is, get the light right, still 1.5. Okay. So I suppose I probably could use these specs on for this next bit. Now this is the interesting bit. Will it cut the mustard, or will it turn into a shaggy pile of plastic? Right, so yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a set, as always, that is bigger by miles, or by some distance, than the ones I'm actually using, I hope. So for a 10 I'm going to start with a 13. For a 13 I'm going to go 16. Actually, I'm going to go 17. Woohoo! And for a 17 I'm going to go quite a bit over. I'm going to go 24. It seems crazy, but I want room. 26, I'm going to go 32. Could even go 36, but 32 will do. 36, I'm going to go 42. 32, 36, 42, and then the last one will be a 48. I feel like I could do one more at about 50, and I know there's a there's one in the bass guitar set that I could get for that sort of size. But okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to cut the nut slots on this stuff, and if it doesn't work I'm going to knock this nut off and replace it with bone, which I've got standing by. In fact, I've got two. I've got one that's got a bit of an SG, more a flatter back, which is what I've got several of at the moment. It's hardly any different, but it's just a little bit squarer. But I've got a slightly more rounded off one, and see how either of those two look, whether they'll work if necessary. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this close to pitch. You're pinging on the nut slot there. Okay, that's roughly to pitch, just to put the neck mostly under tension. Actually put the strings mostly under tension, that's the important bit for this part of it. Now I'm going to go for 0.3 millimeters over the first fret, which is my personal favourite. I'm going to start with the bottom 3, so I knock off the first 2 and measure what the D is doing. There's a big gap there. So I'm going to take my chosen D and I'm going to just have a little experimental cut, and I'm cutting backwards at an angle a bit. I'm just having a feel of this plastic. It's actually not too bad, so I think we might get away with it and keep the basic colour matching of the nut to the rest of the binding and plastic on the guitar. If it was more of a softer plastic, then I would be looking to replace it, but you can't tell sometimes until you start cutting. I would have thought that Epiphone of this quality would have a decent nut. The other thing about it is not just whether or not it cuts cleanly. Sometimes it can be really, depending on the plastic, it can be really difficult to control the depth compared to bone. So nearly on the mark there. So what you might find is with plastic, you may see me suddenly hit the mark too soon, and have to basically either go into the get out of jail free space of either repairing the slot or shimming the whole thing or replacing it with the bone. Just hard to tell. Sometimes it goes that way with plastic. It seems not to be as dependable in terms of its function, the way it cuts. Yes, so Christmas almost here. Bob had arranged this with me from quite a while back actually, to come down today, and had a spare day so I could do this, and he's going to then be able to take it back up to folks or friends where he's spending Christmas, so he doesn't have to be without it. But what's also interesting is he's leaving me with an early Samick built Epiphone SG, which is quite an interesting beast. It's one with the neck set quite far into the body, relatively far into the body I should say, giving it a bit more of a bit less of a top heavy feel. And I think he's looking to have that one refretted. Also possibly get another pick guard for it, because the pick guard that's on there, although it's kind of period accurate in terms of its style, seems clearly to have been cut by somebody by hand, so a replacement on that, and I think he also wants rewiring, so a bit of a longer term one, but just a really satisfying one, certainly from my point of view, and probably from anyone who drops in and watches these. Quick note, some regular supporters of We Love Guitars, subscribers, have said to me, stop apologising for the way I do things, or the length of the videos and the style or the format or whatever, and I really appreciate those comments, and I have to be watchful not to find myself in explaining or justifying or apologising mode. However, I guess from a housekeeping point of view, is if you're somebody who's just arrived here and you haven't watched my videos before, I just need to let you know, if you're one of those new folks, I need to let you know that these videos are aimed at a very specific target audience or market, shall we say, and it's one that I've considered very, very carefully from the beginning of doing what I do, and suffice to say that that market or that audience likes it this way, likes the videos this length and this detail, and with all the boring bits unedited and so on. So if that's not you, which it may well not be, if you're under 45 and you like faster paced content online, that's absolutely cool, but this probably won't be for you. So I'm not apologising for it, I'm just saying realistically it probably won't suit you, but it does suit the audience I intend it for, so I won't be changing it, and I appreciate your sometimes very well meant advice, but often it's kind of inappropriate really, because it works. If you're one of those people, what you don't see is that doing it this way brings me work exactly like this. Bob's arrival today, he's driven from Coventry, which is some 200 miles away. He's brought his guitars 200 miles for me to do this, and Bob's brought them. First of all, he's exactly my target audience, stroke market, in every respect, male, coming up on 50-ish, middle of my age range, my target market. And he's watched the videos and made his decision to bring his guitars, so it works for me perfectly well. Alright, so if I appear to be dismissive of any feedback, it isn't because I don't value it, but I think before you give the feedback, some folks, I think you need to entertain the idea that maybe somebody's doing something a certain way because they've worked out that it works, and that your view from the outside, that you instinctively know how to do it better, may not be the case, and B, kind of negates the experience and insight that's gone into doing it this way. and of course doesn't know that it works for me. And I'm going to go with what works above your theoretical view that it should be different. Okay, so I'm not apologising for it. I just need to state that. And I have to be absolutely honest. One of the hardest things to do is to in some ways is to retain my politeness when faced with another person saying, way too long and boring, you should edit this, dude. And it is the big challenge for me is to come back and say, look, with due respect and thanks for commenting and all the rest, and what you can't see is that it works for me as intended, and therefore, you know, with all gratitude and respect for your perspective, I'd be mad to change it, wouldn't I? And I try to summon up that politeness to respond in that kind of way, mainly because that's the kind of person I want to be. I don't want to be somebody who ridicules somebody or creates conflict. There's absolutely no benefit. So if you happen to be one of those people who thinks this is too long and boring, I'm doing this right now for a great customer who's driven 200 miles to bring me 2 of his guitars. I'm doing this because doing this and filming it in this way is what brings me customers like that. So with respect, your point of view is kind of irrelevant on that. Anyway, that said and done, if you are not in my target market, if there's something useful in here for you, great. If not, do whiz off and disappear, back button, go and find, there's tons of really short how-tos and, which I'm sure will suit you better. Anyway, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going across with my feeler gauge, and I'm working each string at a time, and I'm going down to 0.3 over each fret, and actually the plastic's cutting pretty well, so I think we'll be okay with this. We won't have to lose the nice cream nut. So the issue of the nut here is it's hard to underestimate. I do look at other people's stuff, other how-to luthier things and books and videos and blogs and whatever occasionally. I don't spend a lot of time there because kind of once you've worked out how it best works for you, sometimes you don't need to be constantly comparing. But one of the things I noticed is most people who work on guitars do understand that the nut is critical to it playing and staying in tune and being light and easy to play, and so on and so on and so on. But what I find, this is the amazing thing, but it doesn't really surprise me because this is sort of where my niche, I think, is that what I do notice is those people who know that, and in their business, setting up guitars and whatever, are probably quite passionate about the importance of, for example, this action I'm doing here. Believe in it strongly, passionate about it. But what I notice is that I think they sometimes don't know how to communicate that across to somebody who isn't them. So i.e. perhaps a typical guitar owner who hasn't paid for a setup before, or is struggling with their guitar but doesn't know why. And one of the things that I've always been very keen on doing, because I was a lecturer for many years, amongst a lot of other things that I've been in my life, one of the things was I was a university lecturer, and kind of my natural style is to want to explain interesting things to people who might not know about them. But in doing that, I know that the most important thing is how you make something make sense to people is there's too many situations, and very often in the luthier world too, where a luthier may know something about, I'm just going to go backwards one step by the way, may know something about, or may know lots about what's really important for making a guitar play well, but somehow fails to translate that across to a guitar player in the kind of way that convinces them to come down with their money, or to come down with a guitar and say, right, tell me about this, or yes, I'm gonna I'm gonna invest this much in making this guitar so much better. So that's what I like to do, and that's why I do these videos, and that's also why I've done my ebook and kind of share information on Facebook as much as possible whenever I can, is because I not only like the bit about helping others make sense of something that might have confused them the way it confused me for years, but also there is obviously a kind of sense, a solid business logic in it too, is that if I can get somebody to understand, maybe through my videos, just how big a difference this work makes to their guitar, then they're going to either do it themselves, or they're going to take it somewhere else, or if they feel they like the approach I've taken, they'll bring it to me, which doesn't hurt at all. Blimey, much differenter. Okay, so what we've got now is a really nice 0.3mm action across all the strings over the first fret, and that part of it is done. What I will do is I just want to double check and make sure the truss rod hasn't sort of progressively changed that much over the time that we've been doing that. I don't want it to sort of an hour later to be banana shaped, although occasionally that happens with some guitars. They seem to have a delayed action. I've not been able to determine what makes that happen, why one does and one doesn't, but it seems to be what happens sometimes. Okay, so the part that I call setting the action is done. I have got a really nice low 1.5mm action down here. A really low action over the first fret, and pleasantly the nut plastic cut really well, so I don't have to replace it. We don't have to go with a slightly different colour. I'm so keen on getting this bit right that I'm going to monitor this all the way through from here, and if it doesn't perform, which I'm sure it will now, having seen the plastic, if there's any trouble I will still replace it if necessary, because this is the most important bit in all of it. And in a way, just going back a step, that's what I really like to impress on people, is not hey, there's this and you can do this and this makes a lot of difference and the really important thing for the intonation is this and the other and whatever. I like to impress on people that this alone will transform your guitar, and if you could only do that, you will have, or do the three things you've seen me do already, you will have a very, very different guitar. Now of course what comes out of that as you probably start to see, is that once you've set a nice low action like that, suddenly you'll come across the impact of the uneven frets underneath, and that's quite common. Somebody commented, said, all those guitars you set up, they all sound out of tune when you play them. They sound out of tune to me. Okay, so having done that, what comes out, as I mentioned, is the uneven frets. Now I'm going to get up close and personal to you without bashing into anything. I want you to hear that. Now that is clearly stopping us having a nice low playing action, and that's why most guitars that you'll come across, including nicely built, proper, decent manufactured guitars like this, will always be set, the action will always be set just above the point where those uneven frets come into play. And the thing that surprised me when I started doing this, and maybe still surprises you, is the question, why the hell do all guitars, including manufactured big name guitars like this Epiphone, why the hell do they all have uneven frets? And it seems like they do because it's inherent in the manufacturing process. You just think of the process of squeezing metal frets into a curved piece of wood, into a slot, and then in that slot there could be all manner of gunge, and I can see that some of these frets at some parts are the underside of the fret, the flat bottom of the fret, and then there's a tang underneath. But the flat bottom is, you know, I can slide a, I had thin fingernails, but I could slide a blade under there and it would sort of, you know, you can make it cling. There's a space. So you can see that it's not sitting absolutely watertight flat on there, and if it's not sitting watertight flat on there, where's it stopping? Is the tang hitting the bottom of the slot? In which case, is every single one cut exactly the same? And the answer is no. It's a quite a crude process. So the frets will be pressed in as far as they can go reasonably with whatever tool or device that's being used, and that will be a lot. And hopefully it will be within a certain tolerance that you can get a reasonable action, as this guitar had when Bob brought it to me, and it'll go out the door and people will play it and it'll be great and they enjoy it. But what you can see is the difference between it being a nice looking okay to play guitar and a nice looking superb to play guitar is the investment of this amount of time and accuracy in I guess finishing off jobs that can't be done precision wise in the factory, like the nut slots. Now there is no, you couldn't, if you were going to think about it from a manufacturing point of view, you say, right, okay, we needed these slots cut down to a certain depth to give, let's say, some people disagree with how it goes. Some people want a gradient of height above the first fret. I found that I like to go with the same height over the first fret. That's my style, whatever. But to get that 0.3, you'd have to, if you wanted to do it by cutting a certain amount of depth into the nut itself in the factory, you'd have to be absolutely confident of the depth of your cut of the timber, so where your slot sits. You'd have to be utterly sure of the thickness of the fingerboard, i.e. how far up the fingerboard comes up the nut once it's set into the slot. You'd have to be absolutely certain of the thickness on every batch, the height of your nut, and so on, and absolutely confident in the depth. So you get what I'm saying. There's about 5 or 6 variables to say if I was going to pre-cut this and let it and have it drop so perfectly into place that we even get the exact same height above the first fret. It's too many variables to do it in a normal manufacturing, unless it was for, you know, science, Apollo or space travel or something. You know, that kind of precision you'd get, or you're building a precision engine or something. But when it comes to plastic and wood and mass production in a factory, you just don't get that kind of accuracy. The only way you're going to get that kind of accuracy is to do it post-installation. So once this is all put in place, then you've got what you've got. Then we go down with the slots until everything measures 0.3, and then we stop, and that's what we needed. But you can't get it any other way. You see what I'm getting at? So, long-winded way of saying, the difference between a beautiful looking, you know, beautifully constructed guitar and a beautifully good looking, beautifully constructed and beautiful to play guitar is 3 or so hours of precision attention, which is what I'm doing now. And money and cost don't seem to really change much. The basic truth of that sort of equation applies kind of all the way across the price range. Now I know that the more modern Gibsons, for example, have an adjustable brass nut, so they finally addressed that issue, and you can adjust the nut yourself to give the kind of first fret playing action that you like. But you can still go into any music shop and find plastic, or sorry, tusk nut, or even plastic nutted Gibsons sitting on the shelf with massively high first fret actions that I wouldn't want to play, and I know won't stay beautifully in tune. So it's not rocket science, but it's a matter of economics and time and so on and so on. Now what I've just done, as you can see, is painted the frets with marker pen. I'm hoping at this stage, while I'm doing this, that all the strings just hang in there for the time being, because I'm going to throw them away afterwards, but currently they're sacrificial strings for the purpose of the setup, and after this next stage I'll be able to throw them away, so they just need to last long enough to do this next bit. Little mental note there, little ping, that's going to need sandpapering. That was the D, I think. Okay, I'm just going to make a note of that. So D pings, so far D. So I'll know to go back. We've got plenty of other chances along the way to hear any other pings and dings. So, but it tells us very accurately that this that slot needs widening just slightly. It doesn't need deepening. It's a perfect depth, but we do need to widen it, and that would just be a case of a little bit of careful use of a 600 grit sandpaper. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay, so now we're into the magical part of this thing. Okay, so with the guitar lying as it is on its back, with the neck partly supported but still with quite a bit of weight pressing on it, with the guitar pressing down and so on, and if you wanted to hear the difference that this makes, you could tune that up and watch the note change on the tuner. You may or may not be able to hear it audibly. Okay, as you press it down, it slacks, it goes down in pitch. Pick it up, it leans back, and you can probably just see it visually if you're looking right up close. Now I'm going to do this on its back, and some people get really irate about all of this and go, no, you've got to do everything in this position. Well, the truth is, you can do it in that position. If you do it in this position, right, the way I'm going to do it now, what do you need to know, right, for it to work? Well, I need to know from experience that doing it flat on its back will work. Now what do I mean by that? If you're obsessed about chasing a reading or a number, an end number, right, and I'm drawing on my board. Right, I kind of, sometimes this point needs making, and it sounds a bit of a silly one. If this was your target, and forget, it doesn't really matter whether it's, you know, the height of the relief or the playing action at the last fret or the first fret action. Let's just for now, let's forget what the hell that figure is. But let's say you read that from Gibson and they told you for some measurement you were aiming for that, right? And that was your only thing in sight. Then the truth is, everything you want is, you're kind of assuming that in the playing position, right, you want it to give that value. So of course, if you're working to that value, and at this point you're measuring that value there, and at this point you're measuring that value there, and at this point you're working to that value there, and so on and so on and so on, then of course it makes sense that you have to, for it to come anywhere near that value, right, or to make sense of that value, if that value is in the playing position, then you're going to measure it or do your work or whatever it is in the playing position. The difference for me, and I just kind of, this is not again by way of apology, but it's really important for people sometimes to get their heads around, to give them a break actually. I don't need the break. Some people need the break when we come to doing things. What am I interested in? I'm interested in a guitar, badly drawn, right, that plays beautifully well. Plays beautifully well in the playing position, of course. Oh yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be it would be no point if it played beautifully well on its back, but crap in the playing position. So that's all I'm aiming for, right? Now notice straight away is I don't really care about numbers here, right? So I'm not aiming for numbers. I'm aiming for a guitar that I know plays and feels great in the playing position. For me personally, I know that some numbers contribute to that. So when I'm doing the guitar on its back, there it is on its back, look, I know that that action there, last fret action on its back, last fret action on its back, or let's call it 1.5, I know that at that stage there, that contributes to a playing action that feels and plays great. I don't care what it is when it's upright. I don't care what that measurement is. If it's 1.47 compared to 1.5 when it was on its back or whatever, or it'll get bigger actually, but let's say it's 1.6 there, really, I don't care because I'm not measuring it. I'm measuring it there as a means to a particular end, and that particular end is that thing that doesn't have any numbers involved. Do you get the point I'm making? Likewise down here, relief. When it's on its back, it's not true relief. I don't care. Do I know technically that when it's in playing position, really that will probably be more like 0.3 relief? Do I know that intellectually? Yes, but do I care? No. I just know that as an input at this point in the process, that's useful, right? That's all I do. I use it as an input. Do I care that in real life it's 0.3? Not really. I just know that inputting that value here and here leads to that. Right? So if somebody wanted to put my guitar on its side and measure, they go, ah yes, but what you've got is 0.2875 recurring really in relief. Great. And what you've really got is a last fret action down here isn't 1.5, but it's 1.5973. Great. I don't care. I'm not precious about it. That's the point. And same with down here. I've got, you know, another, let's see, what other things? Last fret action, first fret action. Those three things are inputs at a certain point. That's all they are. They're a means to an end. And the end has no numbers. I don't care about the numbers. I care about how it feels to play. So the reason I kind of go long-windedly explain that, in case, it's not really to justify, it's just so that some people, some decent, kind-hearted, supportive subscribers will be thinking, oh yeah, but he's doing it on its back and everyone I've heard the luthiers say you've got to do it there. Do you see that if 0.2 on its back turns into a great playing action there, do I care what it is there? No, I just know that at the point I'm doing it there. So why do I do it on its back? Because it's easier, right? The truth is, all you need to know is intellectually what happens, right? If this is pressing down, the note gets under this gravity, right? You need to know what happens if you hold it there, right? Headstock is pulling the head down, okay? When you put it there, the headstock isn't pulling so much, so that gap will open up just slightly. So what I calculated here as 0.2, when I put it there, will be a fraction higher. Right? I also know it'll be a fraction higher if I've done fret leveling, because I'll have taken a few thou off the top of that fret. So my input at that point of 0.2, by the time I've stood it on its side and I'm playing it, by the time I've fret leveled it to take a bit more off the fret, I know that that will probably actually, if I got a laser beam on it, will measure more than 0.2, sorry, there's not 0.3 that I normally aim for. It'll be technically more than 0.3. So when I'm talking on these videos saying I have a playing action of 0.3 at the first fret, I guess what I really mean is at this stage in setting it up, I have I set 0.3 with it on its back without having done the fret leveling. Truth is, I don't really care at the end what the measurement is. I just know that that input in that process results in a really nice playing guitar. Okay, so if maybe that might help one or two of you clarify that thing where people if you get somebody like me who isn't bothered about the end numbers, but only uses numbers as an input in the process, come up against somebody who's obsessed by the end numbers, there'll be no way we'll see eye to eye. And if you're one of those people seeing it, you get what I'm doing, and then you hear somebody arguing it from that perspective about, but Gibson say 0.3795, they may be attached to the end numbers more than I am. All right, so it's two different worldviews, and that's all that's worth knowing about this thing. Okay, all you need to know, if you're going to do it my way, you just need to be intelligent and know when you take the gravity off the neck and it no longer bends downwards, the gap will open up slightly. Okay, if you spent your time playing a guitar like that, your gap would open up even more because the neck will bend forward under gravity. So it's just being intelligent about what the gravity does to the guitar. Now I place it here like this to try and keep it in as neutral a position as possible. So this, placing it here, causes a bit of a fulcrum here, which bends this part a little bit up from the body, tiny bit. It cancels out some of the downward bend, but there's still a bit of gravity bending down here. If I put it there, different things apply. I'm cancelling out the downward bend of the headstock, but I'm putting more of a fulcrum around this point, so I'm getting the neck bending up a little bit as the weight pushes down here. All I know is that with the inputs that I measure and put in, with the method I do it here, with the end result when I put it up on its side, it plays. That's all I care about. That I'm going for the end result, and I've come to the numbers because they lead through my process to an end result that works. That's all I'm saying. So it's really, I think it's important to know that, because it does explain why I'm not obsessed by numbers. So, you know, when somebody says, oh, you know, Gibson recommend 0.379 or whatever, I always say, go with what works for you, and if you get great results, stick with it. Now, you know, whether it's 0.1 or 0.2 of relief over the middle of the middle part of the neck, I have another default thing that says change it. Start with something and move away either side of it and see what happens, because that way at least you're going to find out what happens. If you just aim for a factory or a manufacturer's recommendation or a dogmatic must be this figure, then you're not really going to experience what happens when you change it, and so you learn less. It seems silly. Okay, all of that aside, but I'm glad I made that point, because I think it's quite important. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a miracle of the simplest technique in the world, a miracle of maths and physics, to level the frets on this guitar. Many traditional methods recommend, or most I learned, you take the strings off, you use a truss rod to flatten the neck passively, hold it in as flat a position as possible, and then you get a radius block or a file, let's say a file like this, a nice flat file, really nice and level, and you just go and level the frets. And it's very effective, and you get a load of frets that are level relative to each other. However, with the strings off, that would be fine if you then played the guitar with the strings off, but you don't. So even if you leveled, let's say the frets that you got 100% level with the neck in a passively flattened mode, when you restring it, it not only curves the neck, we know that, but that's not too big a problem, because it's we're only talking relative levelness. So something that's level this way, when you curve it slightly, they'll still be relatively level, or level relative to each other. They're just over a curve, which this guitar, the playing mechanism of the guitar, kind of accommodates that. But the thing that does kick in when you restring it is a compression effect. So it's not just curvature, it's a compression of these parts together, and that, believe it or not, pushes the fret slightly out of line in a way that doesn't happen when you're leveling, isn't at play when you're leveling it with the neck passively flattened. So if we did it this way and we got 100% level frets, all I'm saying is that in the conventional way, when you restring it, you'll lose a bit of that accuracy. I can't describe exactly exactly how it comes into play, but I've experienced it, and there will be something about the compression on the neck forces the frets just fractionally out of alignment the way you had them a minute ago when the neck was off and unloaded. And this method of doing it with the strings on and the neck underload and curved, but it's that underload as well as curved. Some people have these jigs that just recreate the curvature, but they don't have them underload. It's great. You can level them then curved if you've got the right tool for it, but you still don't recreate the compression effect. And if you don't, then all that happens is you reintroduce the compression effect when you restring it, and you wonder why the fret leveling that you thought you had was not quite as accurate. So this method does it with the neck not only curved slightly, 0.2 of a millimeter, but it's still curved, but it does it under compression, so that when we relatively level, or level relative to each other, all the frets on this neck, then what's going to happen is that we can take the strings off, clean the guitar, do repairs, do anything we want, and then when we restring it with the same gauge of strings, we're going to get the neck drop back into exactly the same configuration as we just had it when we leveled it, and that's going to give you the closest accuracy. That's a pretty good outcome, but it isn't the main reason I use this method. I mean, 5% of extra accuracy is cool, but it's not. It's by no means as big a change as not leveling your frets to leveling them with the flat method. That's a massive improvement, right? That's a revelationary, transformational improvement. This extra 5% isn't really the difference. You'd hardly notice it, to be honest, right? It is technically the case, but you'd struggle to feel the difference. The real benefit of doing this method is that this is the only method, compared to the others, that allows me to only take exactly as much material off the frets as is necessary to make the action I've chosen play, and that's why I do it this way. The other methods, you just keep going until you've got some sort of level, and then you stop and you go, right, that's me done. What I've just done is I've just placed the 3 little brass feet equidistant along the neck, and by virtue of physics, that one's a bit higher, that one's a bit lower, and that one's a bit higher. The 3 little feet together map the curve, and adjusting this little truss rod with some sandpaper on the bottom means I bend the truss rod until it matches that same curve, so it touches all 3 points simultaneously. Now when it does that, I can tell that it's matching the exact same curve as is in this neck, with compression, with curvature. So now when I drop off my high E string, and I use a little rubber spreader to spread the strings apart, and I take this curved tool and I drop it into what I call the E track, which is where the extent of where the E string sits and plays, and I start to gently move it back and forwards. You can notice it's a little bit shorter than the whole neck, but that's fine. I'm covering it by just tracking it back and forwards across the whole whole length of the neck. And what I'm doing is I'm basically just gently taking off the tops of any high frets. Now at this point I always stop and do a diagnostic re-examination. Sounds dramatic, but I'm seeing whether the most important thing is have I got the curvature right. So I look at this, and you won't be able to see this very well, but I look at this loads of times, but hey, let's do it again. So what I'm showing here is cutting a bit, cutting quite a lot, cutting, same, missing a bit, missing that one altogether. So we've got a couple of low frets up here, and a couple of everything's cutting, and what it's telling me is that there isn't that huge amount of unevenness, but we're going to just bring it down to the same amount, or bring it down to even or level as we can do to make every note on this neck play. So the nice thing is that that first diagnostic told me it was cutting all across the fingerboard, apart from 1 or 2 noticeably low frets, which we can take on board. But because it's cutting all the way across, I don't need to. I've got the bend right. The bend is matching. The bend in the tool is matching the bend in the neck, so I don't need to recalibrate. I just level. And then the beauty of this method is I stop. After a little bit, I stop and interrogate every string, and you'll agree that that plays every string, every note, sorry, every note on that string. So now that's achieved enough levelness in that part of those frets to make all the notes in that string all the way up and down the neck play cleanly. I don't need to do any more leveling. I'm not aiming for some imaginary point where there's no rocking. beneath the level of this action there may still be unevenness, but I don't care. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the B string and shift it again with the string spreader and move it to one side. And I'm going to use the same, I always use the same setting for the second track, the B track, and then I recalibrate for each track after that. And the reason I recalibrate is that often the relief, the curvature, can change across the radius of the neck. And so by recalibrating I take into account the possible changes of the radius and accommodate those and readjust the tool to match. Now I'm going to stop again. I can see it's cutting evenly across all parts of the neck, so I don't need to recalibrate. I've got the bend right. This is now, I'm going to play each note tiny little bit there, tiny bit there. Now remember, it was sounding really crap before, but it's now almost there. So we're talking microscopic amounts of metal that's coming off to even these out, because the clearances involved in this are just tiny to begin with. So just a bit of gravity, the weight of the rod, the sandpaper, which is 400 grit, and together those things are working to just take off enough metal to create the clearance we need for those notes to ring out properly. And it is tiny amounts of clearance necessary. Now what we'll hear as we get to the point where they're level enough, we'll hear that those notes free up. And the next thing we have to then just double check, because it's not quite enough to have all the notes playing. What we might find, what we heard, is some of the bends were zinging out. So what I'll need to do is just double check the bends as well. We may have it clear enough to play single notes or fretted notes, but it still may just choke out on the bends. Tiny bit in the middle still to go. That's about all there is on that. Now when you're doing this, you have to always be sort of in judgment call mode. Alright, so if we, let's say we take a bit more metal, you notice that the point is we're taking, to make something level, we have to take material off all of the frets. And the reality of frets is that your fret leveling is usually dictated by your lowest fret in the sequence. So if there were a couple of low ones here, they make the following ones high. And quite often by the time you've taken the tops off the obviously high ones, what you find is you're chasing the low ones on a set of frets. And those, often it's the low ones that make the next note sound high or buzz. Tiny little bit there. Now I'm not going to go any further with that. Now this is where I'm talking about judgment call. The temptation is, and let's see what we're on, 12th fret. Let's do a tiny bit more, focus on the 12th fret. But after this run, I don't want to take any more off, and that's where it's a judgment call, because you may find that because of a low fret, I'm not saying it is in this case, but because it can be the case that because of a low fret, you have to keep on going to bottom out a chip or a fret that somebody's already worn down by fret leveling on a particular spot. And if that's the case, then you're really, what you're doing is you're taking away fret life from all the other frets in an attempt to bottom out that one spot. And you may come to a point where you just decide that's not worth doing. And I may decide after that one, I'm going to decide that's the point I've reached. Now if that is the case and I still can't get a clean note there, then what I'll do is I'll do a 1/10 of a millimetre adjustment at the bridge up, which will often clear it, because the amount is so tiny that the clearances only have to be so tiny that a tiny adjustment here, which doesn't feel any way different from how we've currently got it, will clear us out of that zone. But I always like to try and get it at the action I first set. Okay. Now I'm choking out a little bit on that, but I am going right across the other tracks, so I'm not going to worry too much about that to begin with. Now what I haven't done, which I normally do, is mark up where I put the brass knobs, because it normally saves me messing about relocating them or trying to measure where they should fall each time, which I'm having to do now. So I'm going to recalibrate a few more times, so while I'm at it I just mark off the point where the brass feet sit. It saves me a little bit of time, which is why I got this out, and so it points to where they sit. So what I'm doing now is, as I'm at the what I call the G, I'm lining up for the G track, I'm just going to recalibrate, and it shows me that it's moving without touching the middle one now, so I'm going to curve it a little bit more to make sure that it touches the middle and the end at the same time. This is always my anchor point, by the way, the left side, and I'm waiting. What I'm aiming to do is I want this to hit the middle and the far right with the same amount of force at the same time, and that's gone too curved, so I was hitting the middle first. Like I've said many times on these videos, this is a matter of feel, and you will only get that feel when you've done it a few times, but I promise you, you'll probably do it right the first time anyway, and all that will happen is you'll just get better at it as you do it more. So here we are in the G track with a slightly recalibrated truss rod, or banana as I call it, and I'm just now working on the G track, everything from the kind of B string to the A string, to the D string basically. I'm conscious that, you know, this is the territory that the other strings come into when they bend, so if it's not even, then that's why other strings will be choking out. So again, replace the string, give it a test from the playing perspective. And tiny 15th fret, sorry. Tiny little chokey on the 15th fret, we'll just get rid of that. And that's what's great about this, is you can literally hear as that evens out. So, you know, with patience, a little bit of careful application, we know where we're looking at. It's almost like one of these things where you look at it and it focuses your energy there, even if you're not actually pressing any harder anywhere than anywhere else. It's sort of, I'm looking at the 15th because I need to get that down and level. And once we get there, it'll play cleanly and we'll move on. Now, looking across all of these, you're constantly keeping an eye on what you're doing to the frets overall. Of course, it's destructive, it takes away fret material. Yep. Still a tiny bit of ripping my fingers, a tiny bit of zing, and it's kind of focusing on that 15th fret around about this point here, which is the G track still. So although the G is playing perfectly well, I'm going to stay for a minute in the G track. I'm going to do a little bit more work in there because I want those bends to get all the way across from the E track to the G track, and there's something just holding it up there. So even though all the notes are playing really well, I'm just going to do a little bit more work in that G track. So as I say, we're constantly watching what's cutting and how much. I'm conscious that right at the end here there's a fret that's completely lower than everything else, hasn't been touched at all in any of the leveling, so that one is by default lower. No, that's enough. That's enough of a bend for me. So that's freed up the E bend into the territory of the G, if you get what I mean, which is cool. So now I'm going to just replace the little feet in my marked spots, and I'm going to recalibrate for what I would call the A track. Sorry, the D track. Oh God. Now a bit more curvature needed. Tiny amounts, and how well the truss rod adjusts totally depends on the truss rod you've got, how you tweak it. I mean, it sounds silly, they're simple things, but this one, the reason I use this one and not a longer one is that I like the rate at which it adjusts. It's kind of dependable for my liking, and it suits me. And even though it's a little bit short, I prefer the rigidity and the adjustability of this one over a number of longer ones that I've got up there. So you kind of, it's a working compromise that I'm quite comfortable with. I'll just do a bit of extra toing and froing to take into, you know, pick up those last few frets and make sure they work. And the question, someone might say, well, how long do I do this for? And the truth is, only as long as you need to make the notes all play, and the bends work okay. Everything plays, that's perfect. And now get ready for the A track. So you can see all the effort in this setup so far has been into choosing a playing action that I want to have for this guitar, followed by you know, the easy bits are setting the bridge action or the last fret action and the relief. They're quite straightforward. The precision bit comes in the attention spent on the nuts, getting the nut slots right so that the action of the first fret is correct, but also making sure that the nut slots are smoothly cut, slightly tilting backwards and wide enough. And I've noted that D may be a problem at the end. It may just have a bit of gripping going on. So much of the effort gone into that, followed by this part now. You see how much I'm retuning or recalibrating to get this right. I want this curvature exactly right. So, you know, this is my setups, you can see, are front loaded in terms of precision or attention to detail. Once we've got this part done, it's kind of back to fairly brain off, quote unquote, straightforward. The precision stuff is done, and what's great about this method is that if this was a bolt-on neck, you could take all the strings, all the hardware off, you could take the neck off, hang it up, do stuff, clean it, put new tuners on. When you put it all back together again and reload it with strings, it will go exactly back to the leveling that we're just achieving here, and it's fantastic for that. And it will just play at that action. Now, of course, if you were to drop the action by 0.5 millimeter or even a fraction, you may well find yourself into new uneven fret territories. Yeah, you may find yourself hitting uneven frets again. It's very likely you would. So remember that we're leveling to the action that I've chosen for this to play at. It's not a universal 100% level according to somebody's nuclear ruler. It's level enough to allow this action to play, and that's, you know, that's how we preserve as much fret metal as possible whilst getting the action, the playing action that we want from it. So it's, you know, it's a payoff, a trade-off, sorry, I should say. Fret metal for the playing action. Now sometimes I can hear just the tiniest bit of zzz, and I stop at that point and move on, because I know that it's just little enough for the sanding process that comes in a minute, where I have to sand these, sand and polish these frets, and I know that that will take a tiny fraction of material off as well, and it will just take down that last little bit. So Again, that comes from experience more than anything, knowing where that point is. So now I'm on the final track, the low E track, and just very carefully watching where the tool goes. But like I said, hard precision work pretty much done. The rest of it is concerned with polishing out these frets so that they're really nice plain condition, and cleaning everything so it's ready to be restrung. And then when restringing, focusing on the two main enemies of tuning stability, and those are the amount of unreleased slack in the strings, the unreleased slack in the strings is one, and the condition of the nut slots is the other. And once we get those two right, then all we have to do is set the intonation, which is a pretty straightforward thing, although it's can be a bit annoying on the Tune-o-matic bridge, but it's not overly complex. So we're then on the home stretch. So precision fret leveling work done. My bits and pieces go back in their specs case up into the rafters with all the fret leveling widgets. Ta-da! Now you can see I'm covered in fret dust. Bizarrely, people go, why don't you tape it up? Well, no fret dust gets past this point anyway, strangely enough. I tape it up afterwards because there's a lot of dust from the sanding process, but at this stage it's fine. So we are done, and off comes the strings. And they've done their duty as sacrificial strings. Now of course, when you slap the strings off now, the geometry of the neck is going to change. And what we had as leveled even frets is now going to be all over the place, because not only is the curve now reducing as I take the strings off, not only that, but also the compression is reducing to 0, and so that's going to cause a change in the position of the frets. But we don't care, because we're not going to play it with the strings off. We're going to play it with the strings back on and a set of 10s loading the neck once we've done preparing the frets. So next stage is re-profiling the frets. As people call it re-crowning, but actually it's technically, it never really touches the top of the fret, so I think re-crowning is a bit of a silly name for it. I call it re-profiling because we're just changing the shape of the frets. Now I could take that out, or I could just snip these strings. Do I need another set of Les Paul strings? Possibly. Can I be bothered right now? Nope. It's always good to have sacrificial spare strings, but right now, to be honest, it's Christmas and I'm not going to need them for a little while. So what I'm doing is chopping them, removing them. Now you probably can see that the frets are dirty, the tops of them all have been cut. So I'm just going to give a quick going over with some solvent, naphtha, just to get some of the dust off. But the only reason I'm not really sort of aiming for an overall cleanup right now. I'm just trying to remove the dust, because in a minute I'm going to need to mask off the neck with tape, and if the dust is still on there at that stage, it's going to make this tape not stick. So just as basically just removing, and it's a bit mucky at that end still, but just getting the loose dust away, and you can see how mucky that is. Oh, nice petroleum stink. Get high off. Right. Look at this, non-stop, no breaks. On we go. Okay, we go back to our marvellous pen, and I'm doing this before masking it off. If this was a maple neck, I probably recommend that you mask it off first, because missing with this felt tip pen, marker pen, is a pain. If you hit a maple fingerboard, you will be spending quite some time trying to remove it. You can't remove it with a solvent because you'll end up melting the lacquer, so you have to try and remove it with kind of sandpaper whilst polishing the lacquer back up, blah 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 blah. It's a pain. Okay, so recrowning, what do we mean? It means we take the flattened edges, the squared off edges of these flattened frets, and we round them off so that we return the fret to as close to an arch shape as we can, but without, importantly, without taking any height off the top of the fret. And that's what this little file is designed to do, and it's quite expensive. It's about 80 or 90 quid from StewMac, but it is a good file. In my ebook 5 Steps to Guitar Heaven, I show you how to do all of this setup on both the electric and the acoustic guitar with only using cheap tools, inexpensive tools. I'll show you how to make the banana, and I'll show you how to do this process using instead of a 80 pound tool, a $8.99 file from Amazon or somewhere. And probably more importantly, instead of a £60 set of nut files, how to do all the nut slots with a jeweler's file like that. So really inexpensive tools that anyone can afford to do. So that's all in the ebook that I just recently released. If you're interested, you can find it on iTunes. Just search for the title 5 Steps to Guitar Heaven. If you buy it via iTunes, they get a third of it. But hey, if you want to buy it via PayPal, you can just PayPal me via friends and family, £24.99. Saves you a couple of £100, so it's priced to reflect that. And then I'll send you a link to download the PDF. Or if you want to ask at some later date, just get in touch via Facebook or Gmail. Anyway, so yeah, in that I show you how to do all of this with cheap tools. And why don't I use those all the time? Only because this is, you see how quick that's going. It's about 3 times, technically about 3 times faster than using that 3-sided file. It's actually less accurate than the file, believe it or not, the 3-sided file. But you can see that even if it's 3 times longer using that other file, it's not exactly a long time as I'm blazing through this. So with all things, if you pay for money, you pay for convenience mostly. There's also a part of it that when you start doing something like this, you if you're like me, you probably buy some things because you've bought a bit of the myth that says you can't do this without it, or you can't be serious unless you do this with the expensive thing sold by X, Y and Z dealer. And so there's always that bit, and in a way that's what I hope that my ebook will go some way to disavowing you of that notion, and demonstrate to you, or you can demonstrate to yourself by following the instructions, that you don't need to spend that money on all those tools, which is, I think, a pretty good thing to do. Not that, you know, if you do as many setups as I do, this might be a good investment for you. It was for me. It just makes this part of the job a little bit quicker and easier for me, and it does an perfectly adequate job. So, because I do this all the time, yeah, why wouldn't I have one of those just to speed up and make this bit a little bit easier? Do I absolutely need it? Nope. Do you need it? Nope. Can you get a great result with that? Yep. So if you're only doing your guitar and a couple of others, then why spend all this money, or even why think you have to take it to a tech if you don't? Okay, so now imagine that 3 times longer. It's not exactly a long time, is it, using that? Still, here we go. I've re-crowned my frets, or re-profiled them as I prefer to call it, and I can see a little bit of crown dust or fret dust still there. So the next thing I'm going to do is prepare for the process of sanding the frets to a nice playing finish, and I'm going to use masking tape, and this is a slightly stickier than I'd like stuff, but hell, you know, you can't, sometimes you just can't find the low tack. No matter how you try, my market supplier ran out and haven't been able to get any more. This is low tack, but it's the thinner one. So anyway, so what I'm doing is I'm just going to go over the entire fingerboard with this stuff, and I'm going to also, once I've done that, I'm going to do round the horns and the top end of the body as well, because and the pickups, because there's going to be a lot of dust at this point, and while I don't want that all over in the nooks and crannies, the most important thing is that I want to protect the finish from any possible tail ends of the sandpaper that I'm using. I don't want scuffs on the body, especially on a beautiful finish like this. Some guitars you wouldn't notice, but this one you certainly wouldn't like it. So as you can see, I'm just making sure that the tape butts right up to the frets, and all I want is the frets sticking out. Now in this case, the slightly stickier tape's probably a good thing, because it's going to stick to the fingerboard pretty well. Obviously I come to a point now where it's I need to cut some different size strips, because they're not going to, just to make sure that I don't want the bridge and the stop bar just to drop off. But yeah, I'm going to cut some different strips now, because the obviously the frets get closer together, and the big size stuff doesn't go cleanly between the frets, and also this smaller size one doesn't either. You can buy appropriately sized masking tape or special guitar tape, whatever, but you know, it's an expensive business, and when you go through as many as I do, you might as well just have developed your own little cutting board habit, which I have, and it's kind of repeatable without even thinking about it, and it produces exactly enough tape to mask off the entire neck on everything but the 24 fret super stratty type things, or PRSs or something, but for just about every standard guitar it's perfectly enough. I get my cutting edge, which has gone a bit bendy. I don't know what's happened to the screws coming undone or something. I don't feel like it's sitting quite straight anymore. Anyway, I'm just going to slice up my tape here, and I cut two of these. I guess how wide is this? About 3 feet wide maximum? Not even that, is it? Yeah, maybe just under 2.5 feet wide-ish. And then I cut two of them into thirds lengthways like this, and then two of them into half lengthways, and that gives us enough, narrow enough tape to do the smallest of the frets. And like I say, you get used to this and you just repeat the same process if you do it like me. And I wouldn't normally kind of go through all of this on tape, because this is the point at which some people get really annoyed that I'm blathering my way through something as boring as cutting tape. Why put them through it? It's like I have any choice or control over what people watch. Anyway. See, partly my take on it is, if you don't want to see it, you can hit the escape button, or you can fast forward, or whatever the controls are on YouTube these days. Instead of me stopping and starting and trying to choose what I think you should see, I leave you to be the editors of it. And it's just easier not to reach up and mess about with that. Okay, so there's my stuff cut. Here's my guitar back on the bench, just leaving it kind of dangling there for a minute, and I'm going to start with the thicker bits first as we go into that territory, and often sort of put an extra one across the top there to kind of lock it down, make sure it doesn't come apart, and then just keep on to the end. Somebody made a comment on one of my videos the other day that they liked the real life parts of the videos, usually where Claire comes in and says something like Thomas has crashed his motorbike, or he's been fired, or it's usually something to do with his search for work or something like that. But it's funny thing about that, it seems so much easier to add real life bits to videos in the summer, where I can just walk out of there and into the garden, which is kind of where I spend most of the summer. It's either in the shed or in the garden. But something about the British weather, which gets particularly grey and miserable from a certain point, October onwards. It just doesn't encourage you to go out much. But yeah, I was thinking about that. What other things I could include, but I didn't want to assume that anybody would be bothered to watch weird bits and bobs of my life. I thought that if I started including them, it would be, I'd start taking myself too seriously, possibly. Which I have no problem talking to myself in a shed for 2 or 3 hours on a trot while I'm doing this, because I've got used to it, and it's probably only what I'd like to do anyway if it wasn't so likely to be thought to have gone a bit insane. But yeah, to start including other things, kind of, it sounds a nice idea, but then it starts getting a bit, I don't know, start to presume that people are entertained by my world of stuff, and I think that's a bit of a slippery ego slope, which I don't want to go down really. Bothering what it looks like or how my hair looks today. Which if I bothered by that, I wouldn't be doing this at all. Mind you, I suppose 20 years ago that would have bothered me. But like the other day when I was invited to Steve and Anthony's birthday do. Anthony, who brought me the Ion Strat over to set up, and invited me along, me and Claire, and we went along, and it was very nice. And the invitation was, "I'll bring your guitar," and I got there, and Steve was saying, "Right, well, I've booked you in a 15-minute slot from here to here in the running order," and it was very informal amongst their friends and stuff. But of course, to me, I didn't know anybody apart from having met them once, and so it's quite a challenge. You know, a lot of buttons immediately pressed, like, oh my god, am I actually going to stand up in front of people and sing? Immediately a lot of conversations going off in my head about how crap I am and blah blah blah, and I can't sing and I can't play, and what am I going to play, and everyone's better than me, and all that negative stuff. And like I say, you know, 10 years ago I actually would have chickened out probably. Nowadays, being older, I have that sort of, it's not urgency isn't the right word, but I have that sense of perspective that goes, you only have one life, you're not going to be here forever, and you'd kick yourself if you said no because you were afraid. And it's very, very true. I mean, you know, I still probably don't do half of the things that I want to do still, and would probably do more readily if I had no fear at all. But I'm still pleased to be able to say that most of the time these days now, when challenged that way, I'm much more likely, in fact always likely to say yes. You know, my kind of scaredy self goes no, and then the human being goes yes, and then I live with it. I remember years ago, actually, so many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I went to my dad's, sorry, it wasn't my dad's birthday, it was my stepmom's birthday party, and she'd asked me if I would play and sing a couple of songs, and it was far enough back, now looking back on it, it's far enough back that I was still utterly terrified and self-obsessed about it, and I'm not beating myself up for it. I can understand why. I didn't have any confidence, and I thought I was going to sound and do terribly, and I thought everybody would give a damn, you know, as you do when you're self-obsessed. And there you go, just a quick thought. That's what I like to do to make sure I don't do any harm to the finish. Somebody once said on a video, do you really need all that masking tape? And my answer was very simple, yes. I do. You might not, but I do. Okay, so next stage here, I've got me some, who's sending me a text? Anything good? No. Washington Post is telling me about a plane hijack. All passengers freed. Good. Yeah, next stage is let's get some sandpaper up. I'm going to need to reorder. A sheet of 600, one sheet of 1,000, 600, 1,000, and one of 1,500. And I'm going to tear these up. I'm also going to stash a set for the next guitar I do, so I don't have to repeat this process. How are we doing for time? These are my 3 grades that I use in this process. They're a little bit coiled up from being in the shed too long. You stay there. So I used 2 of each of these. So 2 6s, 2 1,000s, and 2 1,500s. I can get them to sort of stay relatively flat for the time being. There's my sandpapers. And then I followed that up with going over with this micro mesh set from 1,500 to 12,000. And then I get these spare ones and I tear them up the same way, roughly, and put them in a sort of grouping that I can just reach out and grab another time. And in this case I'm going to stick them together with this clip for another day in advance. Okay, so this bit I will stop the video for because it gets really boring. If you thought that was boring, this is even more boring. This bit, magnets. This bit, basically, I'm going to sand all these frets. I'm going to use a mixture of starting off with my hands. Don't ask me why. I just like to do it that way. Then I'm going to shift to this slightly curved block inside the paper, and mainly my focus is taking polishing all of this down to remove any of the file scratches, either from the flattening or from the reprofiling. And I'm going to go down through this sequence of papers right down to the end, and at the very end I'm going to give it a quick going over with some chrome polish, metal polish, and when I have done that, I'll find a dirty rag to do it with. There we go, auto-sol type rag. Then I'm going to take all the paper off and I'll put the strings back on and then show you the next bit, but we'll nearly be finished and we'll be on the home stretch. So I will see you in a little bit when this is all polished up. Back to the polishing part. So you can see it's I'm just doing the auto-sol chrome cleaning bit, and you can see even before that how dirty the whole thing gets during the fret polishing, sanding and polishing part of the operation. But it's worth it because it is the final, well, nearly the final steps of getting close to where we need to be. This guitar's so new. Normally what I would be doing, or what I do on many guitars, would be to take everything off and clean, particularly on second-hand guitars that I've bought, but this is in tip-top condition anyway, showroom condition, so it doesn't need that. So really, next stage now is to peel all this paper off, bin it, give it a clean up, and then get into replacing the strings. And I've sanded already the D slot a little bit to try and, well, to hopefully cure the pinging that we had in there. So with a bit of luck we should be clear of all such pings. Okay, so that's the fret leveling, the action setting, fret leveling, recrowning, polishing and shining up, all done. So I'm just going to gently pull off all this stuff, and then get into the next stage, which will be restringing. Restringing, stretching, fine-tuning the nut slots if necessary, and then the kind of last stage really will be setting the intonation for each string to ensure that every string is the correct length for the guitar neck that's fitted. And I sort of always say it that way because that's sort of what the definition is of the intonation. So every string has to be the exact length for the fitted neck, and each string has a slightly different playing length because of its, by virtue of its composition, the way it's made, its construction I should say, and the thickness. And they tend to, as any of you who've intonated guitars know, they go in two groups of three in the position of the saddles. But basically we test for testing intonation, and it's one of these areas that can inflame lots of passions about, you know, if you don't have a £5,000 tuner, you're a fraud. If you don't do this, if you do a ping but not a harmonic, or a harmonic but not a 12th, anyway. There's all kinds of belief systems surrounding it, and I try to encourage people just get back to the simplistic end of things, right? The intonation on your guitar is something that you can actually hear with your ears. Your ears are good enough to know whether a guitar is actually, or two notes are in tune with each other. Having a tuner helps you to see it visually, but it's not absolutely essential to know. You can know these things without that. The other thing about it, which when people start lecturing about how it must and must not be done, i.e. what equipment you must and must not use to be credible, the thing that annoys me is when you actually do it, instead of lecturing people on forums how it should be done, when you actually do it, you realise pretty quickly that the whole process is built on a couple of very variable variables, and the most important one is no two people squeeze a note exactly the same for a start, and no one person squeezes the same note with the same strength each time. And so the fretted note on a guitar, when you're testing and setting the intonation, you never do the same thing twice with your squeezing the note down to fret it, with the consequence that every single time you do it with a slightly different amount of force, which means you'll never get the same note exactly twice. So this idea of having a kind of, having said that, on top of that, the fact that I'll intonate it for the best guess of how I squeeze the notes will be different from how Bob squeezes the notes on this. So the truth is, you can never be scientifically precise about it, and there's so much variation, or so many variables at play in it, that this thing about having the sexiest oscilloscopic machine in the universe to prove how good you are as a luthier is just nonsense, because there's so much variation and inconsistency throughout the whole process. It just makes a mockery of spending that much on a piece of tuning equipment. But you'll still have loads of people who come on and tell you, you know, you have to have it or else you're a fraud. You can tell I'm a bit fed up with those sorts of things, but there we are. Okay, so here comes the restringing malarkey. We're going blues, whites and reds, and these are 10s, partly because the scale length of this guitar is slightly shorter than a Strat, so it can have heavier strings and they still feel fairly light. Now I'm just going to do, before I restring it, so I'm just going to put on a little bit of oil onto the fingerboard, because the solvent I just used there can just take a little bit out. I'm going to need some more of this shopping list. Yeah, so it's just a matter of putting a bit back in, just enough to sort of darken it down a bit. We don't want to leave it sort of dripping out anywhere, so it's a matter of getting it on there, leave it sit for a minute and then wiping off any excess. Obviously I didn't want to do this until this stage because this is a surefire way of making all your masking tape fall off in the other processes. So that can be a right pain. Okay, so just go over it, get rid of the excess. Okay, so yeah, the intonation process is, don't be fooled into thinking it's scientific, because it can't be. And I encourage you, if you've not done it before, I encourage you to test your ears, test and trust your ears, see what they tell you. You can be, and then confirm whatever you hear with a tuner. And for the tuner you can use a dedicated unit, you can use an application on your phone, there's lots of different things you can use, and all of them will be good enough for you to do the job. And I bet you an imaginary beer that if you were to trust yourself, if you had a vaguely musical ear and you trusted yourself to use your naked ear to tell, I'll bet you'll be a lot closer than you think. Just a sneaky private bet. Okay, so here we have our, we've got a spare one in the pack, which is what I like these rotor sound ones for. Now it's on the floor, thank you. Just threading all of these through in their right order before I attach them. And now the key point from here on is we're going to put on these, lash on these new strings, and we're going to put them on in a way that gives us the best grip for the minimum amount of wire around the posts. We don't want tons of wire, because any amount of caught up wire in the tuner post is sort of stored up slack really, so we can do without that. So the idea would be to get it on, and I use the same sort of method the whole time, and it seems to work quite well for me, but everyone's got their own stringing method and whatever, so mine looks like this. What you can see, I line up, first of all, a little thing, line up all your posts first and get all your, if you can line up the holes in a straight line and then get all your kidney buttons or whatever they are upwards in a sort of vertical position, that sort of keeps them out of the way of the string winder. It can be really annoying when you're trying, especially when you're trying to do the far side backwards. So I pull the string all the way through first, just make sure it's seated correctly at the stop piece, and then I come up to the top and I drag back about a fret's worth, and then I wind on and I hold the string taut, and the first time I hold, the held one goes over the top of the loose one, and as it comes around the second time I yank up the loose one, and keeping everything taut I press the held one under the level of the loose one, so it kind of forms a little locking off mechanism. As soon as I've done that, I find myself a pair of, well, I use these. As soon as I've done that, then I just snip off the excess out of the way and then move on. So I do that same method on all of them, and I just go through and get them all on to begin with, making sure that they're ideally sitting on the bridge properly on the saddle. Again, held one over the loose one first time round, loose one yanked up, held one directed under the loose one on the second time round. It's just enough, that 1 fret's worth is just enough to lock off that spare bit of string coming out there. So it kind of makes its own little locking thing. There we go. It's always a shame because it's so nice and shiny, and every time you do anything with strings at that end, the headstock ends up getting a bit dustier, and you think, oh, I just made it all nice and shiny. Okay, so like I said, everything depends on your tuning, it depends on your attention really to detail at this point. So remember I said that two main enemies of stable tuning are the amount of slack unreleased slack in your strings and the condition of your nut slots. And now we're at the stage where we're going to directly take care of the slack through a process of very rigorous and deliberate stretching, and that's going to be it's going to take quite a while to do. It's sort of a good 20 to 30 minutes if you do it properly. Now look, you notice I'm doing this back to front version now. It's quite hard to do, but same principle. I want the loose one under the held one to begin with. That went okay, and as it comes around, just get the damn things. String winders are such primitive things. So again, I want to hold this so that when it comes round, oops, that's caught up. I knew that's something going wrong there. As it comes round, I want this to go under that string this time, which it is. Thank you. That one got slightly caught up, a bit hanging out the back there, but I caught it before it did any damage. And then these two. Now I do stretching process, tend to stretch so much that sometimes I'll break a string doing it. And it's one of the hazards, occupational hazards, but if you buy these Rotor Sound, they're very clever and they give you spare strings just with that in mind. So I've got loads of spare top E's in various gauges in case of breaking them. I did for a while try to use one of those string stretcher tools, plastic thing, and whilst I kind of like the design of it, I found it lacked enough feel for me, and I actually broke more strings using that than I do by hand, so I kind of reverted to just doing it by hand. So the key things then is to make sure the strings are stretched out fully, and until I kind of persevered and learned a bit about how to do it, I was always under stretching them, and the consequence of that is that the unreleased stretch ekes or dribbles its way out over months every time you play the guitar and when you least want it to. So I've discovered that there's no alternative but to doing it deliberately and consciously to begin with, and that does take quite some time. You'll know when you reach it because you'll be able to stretch it and almost virtually no detuning happens. And until you reach that point, if you go off and play before you reach that point, the bottom line is you're going to get detuning when you're playing, which is of course not what you want. So the first thing I'm going to do in the stretching business, so remember now, is we're really now listening out for, our aim is to stretch out all the slack, and whenever we do any turning of the tuner buttons now, I'm listening for pinging at the nut. And if I can get all the slack out, tune up a few times, and I don't get any pinging at the nut, then I can be pretty confident we're going to have totally stable tuning. And by the way, this principle, what I'm doing here, stretching the strings and getting the nut slots right, this is the secret of making a guitar that plays, tremolo guitar that plays and stays in tune. So a bog standard Strat copy, Squire or whatever, who everybody is convinced will never stay in tune if you use the tremolo, hence everyone locks it off. It's not true. If you do this stuff right, you can use the tremolo as much as you like and it will work and it will return to tune. So you can see that I'm going up and down the strings and I'm deliberately stretching out as much of the inbuilt slack as I can do. And obviously this is a balance between pushing so hard you snap the string, and it will occasionally happen. Depends if it's weakened or if it's going over a particularly sharp bridge saddle or something, you can quite easily snap it. So the first time, after I've stretched them all out, I'm going to tune up So what's great is, once I've got here, I don't really need to worry about anything to do with the action or anything, because like I said, I know that it's going to slip right back in or pop back into the setup that we had before. The relative levelness, everything's just going to return to where we had it. So I've got every confidence, and that's what I love about this method, and that's why I wrote the ebook about it, because it's such a nice thing to have a consistent method that does the same thing, so that I don't have to think, oh, will it play nicely in a minute when I finally tune it up? Will I get a nasty surprise? Will there be a buzz or a choke somewhere? Providing I haven't dropped the height of the saddle, the bridge and its saddles down at all, or changed anything down at that end, all the notes that we had playing earlier on while we were doing the fret leveling will all now play, because the neck is now returned to that condition where we achieved the level. So it's such a great method, I have to say. That's why I'm very excited about having done that ebook. So that detuning is the degree to which slack was coming out. Now as I'm tuning, I'm listening for the pings here, whilst obviously tuning to pitch. One thing I will check on this is, because I did an adjustment to the truss rod, I'm going to do a final check before Bob comes back over, because these things can sometimes take a little while to fully adjust, and what I don't want is to send this guitar off with him with too much relief, because it's still, say for some reason or other, still kind of bending in response to that adjustment. So I want to be confident. It's not often that I do a setup and somebody gets the guitar back within 4 hours, so there is always that very slight risk if I do it this quickly that I don't. I had to sort of try and teach myself once, train myself to hold on to the guitar a day at least longer than when I finished it. I was quite obsessed with quick turnaround, and once or twice I got slightly caught out with something changing after I'd set it up, or even if I didn't, maybe a customer said, oh, I think something's changed, or it doesn't play quite the way I expected, and what I couldn't rule out was whether something had continued to move with the truss rod. So trying to be disciplined and build a day in.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm just taking Thomas to the doctor. I've left the oven on with some chicken roasting for the gravy.
Okay.
It's on very low and it's on for an hour, so it should be okay. But
Whoa, what's that door?
But if you're going that way in about an hour and we're not back.
Switch it off?
Yeah, please.
In an hour, okay. Drive safely in this windy weather.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, there's a little bit of real life. So, right, so I've done at least 3 of those finger stretches, and now I'm doing some kind of careful upward stretches to get every little still bit of detuning going on. So for good measure, because I want this to be right, I'm going to get as much as I can out of these last bits, and I'm going to do one more stretch like this, and then I'm going to play some bends on it and give it a bit of welly playing it. But of course I've got to intonate it. Judging by the setting at the moment, I would assume, and I never trust that too much, but I would expect this to be correctly intonated. Visually the patterns are right, the 2 groups of 3 look in the right place, but may not be, but I'll have a look in a minute. And remember, intonation is kind of a personal thing, so it's almost better that you do your own, adjusted to your own strength of fretting, rather than some luthier's grip. Right, that's where I'm going to back up just slightly from my ultra low initial setting, rather than continue to take down fret material and reduce life. I'm just going to go a tiny adjustment upwards to just to give me that space. I'm not very good with tens anyway, hurt my fingers, but you can see that we're getting very close to the no more stretch part of the game, and I've just done an absolute tiny upwards adjustment just to try and clear that little now just remember that we had that previously when it was a lot higher, and we've brought it down quite a bit, and there's still just a tiny hint of it, so we've got overall a much improved action. Now we're just about negotiating the last details. Tiny little bit there. Let's see what it takes to clear it. Let's have a look where we end up. Okay. Okay, so we've got a tiny little bit of tiniest little bit of zzz going on there, which we may have to live with rather than take more life out of these frets. That's the way it kind of goes. It's difficult to know. As I say, it's always a judgment call. Do you keep on going at all costs, or do you kind of balance sort of good playing or improvement in your playing action against preserving fret life? And I have to call a judgment on it. Right, I think that's pretty close. The biggest improvement really in the action is a little bit down on the bass side here. Not so much, because there was and is still an kind of high fret somewhere in this mix here, which I haven't ground out to its bottom level. But the biggest improvement is going to be around the tuning stability and the nut end of it, where the action is massively lightened. But I think I'm comfortable to live with the action the way it is. I say it's always a kind of compromise. The truth is, if it was a guitar of mine, and then maybe 6 months down the line I might have another go at leveling, knowing what I, after having played it for a while, I know that I need to do a bit more work in a particular area. It's kind of difficult to know how much to do in one go when you start off with it like this, and the time is against me in this case. I haven't got time to go and do a complete strip off and second set. Just a little bit in that G track. It's only when the B crosses, or the E and the B cross into that, right into that G track. Just there on the 15th. It's the 16th fret, just there, tiny fraction room for improvement still, but like I say, time wise, clock is against me on this setup, I'm afraid, so it's going to be just a very slight compromise from where I stand, but I think it's still a very playable action. Yeah. Okay, intonation part, so let me just quickly get the tunery thing going. Again, I'm going to do this on its side, or on a strap, and, oops, I'm going to make all kinds of bleeping noises, sorry. I need to get this ready. Hopefully it stopped bleeping. There's my tuner app. Strap. Yeah, you could intonate in any position you want. The amount of difference it makes in terms of the physical changes of the length involved with the guitar neck slightly under gravity or the guitar neck not under gravity are so microscopic that, like I said before, they are cancelled out by the changes, the differences in how you're breathing between each fretting, far less, whether it's lying on its back or on its side. So people getting, again, too uptight about that, it's really academic to the biggest degree. Okay, so cleanish sound, no effects. So we want to ping what we need a screwdriver of this flavour, and we're going to carry on stretching while I have the luxury of doing it. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to tune the string to, I use the pinged harmonic, 12th fret harmonic with a ping. Some people don't, some people use the open string and then fret it. Now, without looking at, let's go with the A. So I can see it, you can't, right? So let me tune that to pitch. Close enough. Now, is this a complete octave? Same note or different? What do you think? Same with, let's try the D, tune it. Aha! Culprit. Still need to do some sanding in D. Same note. Try the G. What do you think? What do your ears tell you? On the A, same note? If your ears tell you it is the same note, check out the tune note. Same note. D, same note. Was G the same note? Slightly different. Only marginally. Tiny bit sharp. Sharp. Okay, so let's do the E. Pretty much the same. So the bottom three are good, the top three are slightly sharp, so they need to go back somewards. And to do that, I'm going to put my screwdriver in here and turn them anti-counterclockwise a couple of tiny bits and push them backwards a bit. Trying to do them all at roughly the same amount, and then I'm going to need to retune them all. So I've made the strings all a tiny bit longer. Right, come on. Slightly sharp still. B's on. E's a fraction sharp. So I'm going to turn G and E a tiny bit counterclockwise, and we will be there. Remember, we've got to do a bit of sandpaper on D. Good. Good. Fraction sharp, but you know, we're now in the level with the realms of my squeezing a note is different from your squeezing a note. So I can, for example, to prove the point, I can make E, tune it perfectly, and I can make it close to or really sharp if I press it really hard. According to this, it's still a tiny fraction sharp, which the pattern isn't bearing that out, but I will take my cue from the sound waves and see what we get. I mean, it's not out of pattern, but it's just a fraction different from where I visually want it, but I trust the notes I'm hearing or seeing, not the position of the saddles. Give me a G. Okay, so there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Bob's Les Paul, Epiphone Les Paul Standard in Pelham blue and Pelham blue, and set up, tweaked on the intonation, fret leveled, got rid of most, not all but the tiniest little somewhere. To get rid of that altogether, we'd need to go possibly even a tiny bit higher, which I don't want to do really. Just to see where it would end up being out of my range. It's that G going across that curve is making that quite difficult. So let's see what we got. Right, oops, let's go. Times it 1511. Well, you know what? I'm a perfectionist. Watch me go. I'm not totally. Let's go backwards. Let's go backwards. I'm not quite perfectly happy with this, so I'm going to tweak this. It's going to have to work at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But c'est la vie. Where are we at now? Come on. That's where we're at. Got to make that work just as is. Okay, I'm going to save you the boredom of this. You've seen the process once through, and I need to do this quickly without talking about it. I'm going to repeat the fret leveling process. It's going to hardly require any time at all, but I'm going to do it until I can get those little notes. I know where it is now that I'm looking for. Everything else is done. The first fret action is absolutely fine. The relief is great. The blah 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 intonation is good. I'm going to get those little things out. So bear with me, and I will. I'm not even going to mark up the frets. In fact, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do this straight as. But I'm going to switch off and get on with it. So thank you for spending time with me. There you go. Live decisions on the fly. I'm going to get this done fast and furious, and I might even be able to get away. No, I'm still going to need to do all of the polishing, but I've got 45 minutes. See you again. So, second quick fret leveling done, just in time. I hate being against the clock quite as much as that, but anyway, sometimes you have to do it. It's better than it was. There's something about that part of the neck that isn't cooperating with me. Unfortunately, that's the problem with being up against the clock. I can't do any more in the time I've got, so I'm going to leave it at 1.5 millimeters, and that's the playing action it's going to be. I mean, as I said, it's much lighter at both ends. It's just not quite where I'd like it to be, but with time-wise, c'est la vie. I shall have to just accept it, which is rare for me. But anyway, there we go. So just to prove, I can't let it lie. I've got to go and do that extra bit. That's what I'm like. Anyway, so complete another tweaking refret. No, you know, fret level done. Done and dusted. And let's just do a quick adjustment here on these. Eyeballs, that's about right. Okay, yep, so into its box. There we go. Les Paul Standard Pelham blue, beautiful thing, and Bob will be back for it any minute, so let's get it inside the house, get the kettle on, and we're done. Marathon.